The sky was calm, the takeoff routine, until it wasn't. Just moments after lifting off from Lisbon, Air Astana Flight 1388 spiraled into chaos. The pilots, seasoned professionals, suddenly found themselves in a nightmare beyond imagination. The Embraer ERJ-190, fresh from heavy maintenance, refused to obey their commands. Instead, it rolled violently, flipping upside down, plunging toward the ground, then rocketing back up in a terrifying, uncontrollable dance. With every passing second, disaster loomed closer. The crew, realizing they might not survive, made a chilling request: clearance to divert over the ocean, ensuring no innocent lives would be lost on the ground. But even as the situation spiraled out of control, they refused to give up. Battling G-forces, confusion, and a plane that seemed possessed, they worked together to unravel the mystery. Could they wrestle back control before it was too late? And what sinister mistake had turned their aircraft into a death trap? As Air Astana Flight 1388 prepared for takeoff from Alverca Air Base, northeast of Lisbon, Portugal, the crew conducted their final pre-flight checks. The captain, 40-year-old Vyacheslav Aushiev, was an experienced pilot with over 6,000 flight hours and 7 years at Air Astana. His first officer, 32-year-old Baojang Karasholkov, had been with the airline for 5 years and was serving as the pilot monitoring. To assist on the long journey, an extra pilot, 26-year-old Sergei Sokolov, was on board as a relief pilot, ready to step in if fatigue set in among the crew. The aircraft, a Brazilian-made Embraer ERJ-190, had recently undergone maintenance in Portugal and was now set for a 10-hour flight back to Kazakhstan, with a planned stop in Minsk. On board were no paying passengers, just 3 maintenance personnel responsible for overseeing the aircraft's upkeep. They, like the crew, were eager to return home. At 1:30 p.m., Flight 1388 received clearance for takeoff on runway 4. The engines roared to life as the aircraft accelerated down the runway. "Rotate," the captain called, pulling back on the control column. The nose lifted off the ground, and the plane ascended into the sky. "Let's go home," one of the pilots remarked. But just seconds after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. The aircraft suddenly rolled sharply to the left, an unnatural movement that immediately caught the crew's attention. "What the?" a voice in the cockpit exclaimed. The turbulence was intense, but this was something else entirely. The yoke felt strange, unresponsive, erratic. "There's something wrong with the yoke. I've never felt anything like this before." The flight controls were behaving unpredictably. The aircraft oscillated unnervingly, and the captain exchanged a look with his crew. Something was seriously wrong. Despite their experience, there were no warning lights, no system alerts, nothing to indicate the cause of the erratic behavior. Yet the aircraft was in distress. "I have no control," the captain announced. The first officer suggested it might be the control column. Hoping for a solution, they decided to engage the autopilot, trusting it to stabilize the aircraft. For a moment, there was hope that the system, pre-programmed for the flight, would correct the instability. But then, autopilot failed. With the situation worsening, the crew was running out of options. The aircraft was climbing into the clouds, completely unstable in turbulent conditions. It was time to call for help. "This is a mayday," the distress call went out. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday!" the captain repeated urgently, climbing to 4,000 feet on heading 060. At Lisbon Air Traffic Control, Controller Viviana Durao received the call. Her training had prepared her for emergencies like this, but even she felt the adrenaline spike. This was not a routine distress call. Flight 1388 was in serious trouble. "Go ahead with your request," she responded. The pilots desperately needed to return to the airport, but without control of the aircraft, even that was a formidable challenge. Every attempt to bank the plane caused a dangerous loss of altitude. Time was running out, and the fate of everyone on board now depended on their next move. As the aircraft struggled against an uncontrollable descent, the pilots realized they had to gain altitude to safely maneuver and turn the plane around. The urgency was clear. Without climbing higher, the risk of colliding with the terrain below became dangerously real. However, as they attempted to bank, they encountered an unexpected issue. Rolling excessively did little to change the aircraft's pitch, and instead it caused the plane to lose altitude even faster. The realization was chilling. Taking control, the pilot assessed the situation, but quickly found that the problem persisted. "I don't think it's any better," he admitted, though he resolved to keep climbing. Attention turned to the flight computers. Was there a software bug? The suspicion grew stronger as they recalled a recent replacement of 4 flight computers, a detail they had been made aware of just before takeoff. The pilots knew that a new software load had been installed for the flight control system. Given the erratic behavior of the aircraft, it was a logical assumption that a glitch in the software update could be the root cause. With conventional controls failing, they had one desperate option left: engaging direct mode. This would allow them to bypass the flight computers entirely and regain manual control of the aircraft. "Prepare to engage direct mode," one of the pilots instructed. "Roger, your controls," came the response. With the switch to direct mode, the aircraft's performance showed some improvement. There was a momentary sense of relief as they considered turning back toward Alverca. But the respite was short-lived. "It's not enough," the pilot admitted grimly. "I don't have enough control to get us back to the airport." The reality was setting in. Steering was nearly impossible, and with the aircraft continuing its unpredictable movements, returning to an airport was out of the question. The best intentions couldn't change the fact that landing safely on a runway was no longer an option. What are we going to do? The weight of the situation pressed down on the crew. With systems failing and altitude steadily dropping, a grim choice loomed before them. There was only one possible course of action left. "I think we have to ditch." Ditching, the act of attempting a controlled water landing, was an extreme maneuver, filled with peril. It meant guiding a barely controllable aircraft over a heavily populated city, knowing that any sudden failure could lead to a catastrophic crash on land. There was no alternative. "We decided to ditch," the pilot confirmed. This was the only way to stop the aircraft. Request vectors for the ocean. The gravity of the situation was clear to air traffic control. No pilot would make such a request unless they had no other choice. The controller's voice was tinged with concern. 1388, you can reach the sea on a heading of 210, approximately 36 miles. For the last 18 minutes, Flight 1388 had been erratically maneuvering over Portugal, struggling to maintain altitude. Now, with no viable path to a conventional landing, the only hope was to reach the Atlantic before it was too late. "We keep losing altitude," the pilot noted with frustration. Their greatest challenge was stabilizing the aircraft long enough to reach a safe altitude above the clouds. Climbing above the cloud cover would give them a visual horizon, something to aid their control and buy them precious time. Then an idea struck the captain. "Let's try the flaps," he said suddenly. "Give me flaps too." "Roger," came the response. The flaps were extended, and to their relief, the effect was immediate. The aircraft stabilized. 30 minutes after takeoff, Flight 1388 finally broke through the cloud cover, reaching 17,000 feet. It was a small victory, but a significant one. 17,000 feet, the pilot confirmed, and we have visual meteorological conditions. This was a promising sign. If they had managed to climb above the clouds, it meant they weren't about to crash immediately. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a glimmer of hope. But then, without warning, the aircraft plummeted. A sudden, violent left roll sent the plane into a steep dive. The descent was horrifying, 20,000 feet per minute. "We suddenly plunged to the left, and dived," a crew member recounted. "A quick, terrifying descent." For the 3 passengers on board, the experience was nothing short of a nightmare. The cabin shook violently as the aircraft lost altitude at an alarming rate. "Oh no. I had never seen such an abrupt drop in altitude before," one of the pilots admitted, his voice filled with disbelief. The battle for control was far from over. The aircraft plummeted through the sky, the sensation akin to free-falling in an uncontrolled descent. The crew had no idea when or if it would stop. Every second stretched unbearably long as they fought to stabilize the plane. 40 seconds into the dive, the aircraft finally broke through the dense cloud cover, revealing a terrifying sight, terrain rushing toward them at an alarming speed. The pilot struggled against the forces acting on the aircraft, his voice tense as he commanded, "Pull up! Pull up!" The G-force fluctuated unpredictably, briefly easing before spiking to levels comparable to those experienced by fighter pilots. The airframe groaned under the strain, the extreme maneuver pushing the aircraft to its absolute limits. Then came an ominous cracking sound. Something was under immense stress, perhaps even failing. As they neared the ground, a hill dotted with trees loomed ahead. It was dangerously close. But against all odds, the plane held together. The altimeter climbed 8,000 feet and rising. Relief washed over the cockpit as the pilots finally pulled out of the dive just in time. One voice broke the tense silence. "Well done." Another added, breathless yet resolute, "We're out of this nightmare." The immediate danger had passed, but the battle was far from over. The pilots had to regain control and find a safe course. "Let's try to get back on course towards the ocean," one of them instructed. Yet the aircraft was still unresponsive to their inputs, refusing to behave as expected. They contacted air traffic control, desperate for guidance. "Estelle Line 1388, can you confirm our position in relation to the sea?" The reply was swift but concerning. "If you fly southbound, you need to go 36 miles. The situation remained dire. The aircraft was still battered, struggling against both mechanical failures and worsening weather conditions. Wind howled, rain pounded against the fuselage, and the cloud ceiling hung oppressively low. Worse yet, they were now flying directly into a storm. "Can we get to the sea on our current heading?" the pilots asked. The response provided a small glimmer of hope. "If you can fly westbound, you will reach the sea." 35 minutes into the harrowing flight, air traffic control called for reinforcements. The Portuguese Air Force was alerted, and 2 F-16 fighter jets were scrambled to assist. The pilots on the ground knew that guiding the aircraft to better weather conditions could be their best chance at survival. But even as the rescue effort mobilized, another concern arose: fatigue. The pilots were physically and emotionally drained. Still climbing. "Anybody need water?" someone asked, but exhaustion had set in. The strain of fighting to keep the aircraft in the air was taking its toll. Desperate for answers, they turned to maintenance records. "What do you know about the work done on this aircraft?" one pilot asked. "They replaced some parts, including the aileron cables," came the response. That single piece of information changed everything. The realization hit hard. The ailerons, crucial flight control surfaces responsible for roll, might have been installed incorrectly. The captain tested the theory. He turned the control column to the right, expecting the right aileron to lift. Instead, it moved downward. Aileron inputs were reversed. A horrifying mistake, but also a breakthrough. "With opposite inputs, we might be able to control the aircraft," one of them suggested. With newfound determination, the pilots adjusted their approach. "Let's fly this aircraft oppositely. If you want to turn left, turn right." It was counterintuitive, a complete reversal of instinct and training, but it was their best shot at survival. The controls remained sluggish and unpredictable, but it was better than nothing. Fighting against years of ingrained muscle memory, the captain focused on keeping the wings level. Their new goal was clear: climb to better weather, stabilize the aircraft, and pray that the F-16s could reach them in time. 61 minutes into the flight, a glimmer of hope finally emerged. Help had arrived. The Portuguese air defense, through their radio, transmitted a message. 2 F-16 fighter jets were approaching their position. These aircraft represented not just a visual presence in the sky, but also a potential lifeline. However, the situation on board remained dire. The aircraft's altitude and speed fluctuated unpredictably, leaving the crew filled with uncertainty. A tense exchange followed. "What can we do to help Astana Flight 1388? The response was grave. "We have a flight control problem and no visibility." The crew attempted to stabilize the aircraft, but their primary concern remained. If control couldn't be regained, they would have no choice but to ditch into the ocean. The gravity of such a maneuver was not lost on the experienced pilots monitoring the distress call. One of them, a veteran aviator with 25 years of experience, admitted he had never heard a call like this before. His concern was palpable. Given the rough sea conditions, attempting a water landing would be nearly impossible. The odds of survival were slim. Recognizing the dire stakes, Lieutenant Colonel Montero proposed an alternative. "If you have 70 miles of fuel, you can try Beijing. Beijing was a military airfield 70 miles to the south, and crucially, it had favorable weather conditions for an emergency landing. The crew deliberated. If they followed the F-16s, would they have a chance to land? Did they have enough fuel? The decision was made. They would try. With their escort leading the way, the aircraft climbed above the clouds. For the first time since the emergency began, the crew felt a sense of reassurance. They were not alone. The F-16s could guide them to safety. Yet, challenges remained. As they adjusted course towards Beijing, the pilots wrestled with the aircraft's instability. Even with slight control improvements, the jet was still barely manageable. Communication continued between the cockpit and ground control. "Can you confirm heading for Beijing Airport?" The response came swiftly. "Beijing is a suitable airfield, heading 195. They pressed on, determined to make the landing attempt. As they neared Beijing Airfield, the F-16s took position beside them. Using the fighter jet as a visual reference, Flight 1388 prepared for descent. "I'll guide you in. Do you have visual instruments?" A confirmation followed. "Affirmative. Thank you for helping, sir." With the knowledge that they could now control the aircraft to some extent, the crew abandoned the idea of ditching into the sea. Now, their sole focus was on landing. However, landing an unstable aircraft was an entirely different challenge. Keeping the plane level while flying with reversed ailerons and limited control was daunting. As they approached the runway, the plane's stability worsened. The flaps were deployed, first at 2, then at 5. The landing gear was lowered, but the unfamiliar conditions made control erratic. The aircraft began veering off course. "Go around! Going around!" It was too dangerous. The first attempt was aborted. Tension inside the cockpit soared. "I don't think I can do this." Doubts crept in, but they had to try again. There was no other choice. The crew, exhausted but resolute, braced for a second attempt. 15 more minutes passed. The plane aligned once more with the runway. 1,000 feet. "You got this, guys." Encouragement filled the cockpit. "Support me. Say yes. Yes, you're doing it right. Everything will be okay. We will survive." But as they descended below 1,000 feet, the aircraft wavered. The slow speed required delicate control inputs, and the unstable plane refused to cooperate. It began to drift. The risk was too high. "Go around! Go around!" Another aborted landing. By this point, exhaustion weighed heavily on the captain and first officer. After nearly 2 hours in the air, they knew they had one last shot. The decision was made to let the relief pilot take over for the third and final landing attempt. "It's like in football," one of them remarked. "When you need a winning goal, you change the player." This was their last chance. The aircraft turned once more towards the runway. The final descent had begun. "Got it." Here is the exact text you provided. As the initial fatigue subsided, a more daunting realization set in. Controlling the airplane was proving to be an immense challenge. Every adjustment required precise coordination, yet the aircraft seemed resistant, veering off course with even the slightest miscalculation. 1,000 feet above the ground, the crew remained vigilant, monitoring their descent and ensuring they followed the correct approach path. But, just as they neared the runway, the aircraft drifted too far left. Struggling against the unpredictable conditions, the pilot attempted to realign with the center. Only a mile from the runway, the situation worsened. The weather took an unexpected turn, impeding the landing attempt. Strong crosswinds altered the aircraft's trajectory once again, forcing the captain to act quickly. Improvising under pressure, he made a split-second decision to divert to another runway. "We can make it to the other runway," he announced. "Runway 19 left. I see it!" Receiving clearance, the pilot focused all his efforts on executing the landing. After 2 grueling hours in the air, Flight 1388 finally touched down safely in Beijing. Relief washed over the crew as the aircraft came to a full stop. They had done it. Through sheer teamwork and determination, they had managed a flawless landing despite the overwhelming odds. The sense of accomplishment was palpable. For the military pilot, it was one of the happiest moments of his career. Seeing the aircraft safely on the ground filled him with gratitude and relief. Remarkably, the only injury sustained was a sprained ankle, suffered by a maintenance staff member. The successful landing was nothing short of a miracle, considering the extreme circumstances. However, the ordeal was far from over. The Portuguese Air and Rail Accident Investigation Unit was tasked with uncovering the cause of the incident. Within 2 hours of landing, investigators arrived at Beijing Air Base to begin their analysis. Leading the team was José Figueiredo, an experienced investigator determined to get to the bottom of what had happened. As they examined the aircraft, the initial assessment was perplexing. There was no visible damage, but upon closer inspection, they discovered troubling signs. Wrinkles lined the fuselage, and the leading edge of the wing bore clear deformations. These structural abnormalities pointed to severe stress endured during the flight. The sheer force the aircraft had been subjected to left the investigators astonished. "I can't believe they landed this plane," one of them muttered. Given the extent of the damage, the aircraft was declared a write-off. Although no lives were lost, the severity of the event warranted classification as an accident rather than an incident. The decision aimed to emphasize the gravity of the situation and ensure such an occurrence would not be overlooked. Now the focus shifted to gathering first-hand accounts. Investigators reached out to the control tower in Beijing, requesting that the pilots remain on the aircraft until they arrived. Speaking directly to the crew was crucial. They needed to hear the details of the event from those who had lived it. "When did you realize there was a problem?" an investigator asked. "Immediately after takeoff," the pilot responded. The plane started rolling back and forth. The unsettling memory replayed vividly in his mind. The aircraft behaved erratically, the controls responding in ways they never had before. "There's something wrong with the yoke," once he recalled saying to his co-pilot. "I've never felt anything like this before." It was as if there was a complete disconnect between the control yoke and the aircraft itself. The investigators pressed further. "Were there any alerts or indications of what went wrong?" "No," the pilot replied, but one of the maintenance team on board mentioned ordering new aileron cables for the aircraft. The crew had conducted a visual inspection mid-flight and had made a shocking discovery. The ailerons were moving in reverse. The investigators could hardly believe what they were hearing. To confirm the claim, they proceeded with an operational test. "Show us the left aileron," one of them instructed. As the controls were engaged, the results were alarming. The left aileron, instead of moving upward, tilted downward, completely opposite to its intended function. "It's reversed," an investigator noted grimly. It was the equivalent of a car steering wheel responding in the opposite direction of the driver's input, or a bicycle handlebar that had been installed backward. The realization sent a chill through the team. Controlling the aircraft under these conditions would have been next to impossible. The next critical question investigators faced was how such a catastrophic mistake had occurred. The ailerons, a fundamental control mechanism of the aircraft, were operating in reverse, something that should have been impossible under normal circumstances. The maintenance records of Flight 1388 became the focal point of the investigation. Investigators traced back the servicing history, discovering that maintenance had begun on October 2nd and continued until the morning of the accident. The aircraft had been sent to Portugal for a month-long overhaul, carried out by a third-party company owned by Embraer. This was a common practice. Airlines often outsourced deep servicing to external maintenance providers when their own facilities lacked the necessary capabilities. Determined to uncover what had gone wrong, investigators met with the maintenance supervisor. Their first question was clear. Why had the aircraft undergone aileron maintenance in the first place? The answer lay in the aircraft's aging aileron cables. These cables, which controlled the up and down movement of the ailerons, had been subjected to years of wear and tear. Over time, the friction between the cables and their guiding pulleys had caused premature deterioration. To address this issue, the maintenance team had replaced the existing pulley system with a new frictionless mechanism designed to reduce wear. The change had been prompted by complaints from operators who had reported excessive cable wear. In response, Embraer had developed a new design solution, a contactless system that would eliminate the problem. The retrofit process officially began on October 9th. The structural team was responsible for the first phase of the upgrade. Their task was to remove the old pulleys and cables and prepare the aircraft for the new installation. Instead of traditional pulleys, the updated design used square metal frames to guide the cables through the wings, minimizing friction and prolonging their lifespan. However, before the flight control team could install the new cables, the structural team had to temporarily reinstall the old ones. This was standard procedure, but it introduced a potential point of failure. Investigators pressed further. Could the structural team have mistakenly reversed the old cables when reinstalling them? The response was unsettling. It was possible. The team had reportedly struggled with the instructions. Upon reviewing the maintenance logs, investigators identified a critical section of the manual that had caused confusion. This section pertained to the reverse zone, a 2-meter-long segment inside the wing where the cable routing changed from horizontal to vertical. This transition was complex, and any misinterpretation of the instructions could lead to incorrect installation. When asked whether the technician had sought assistance, investigators learned that he had consulted another engineer. However, this colleague also had limited experience with the task, and the manual's instructions were difficult to follow. As a result, the structural team had reinstalled the old cables without realizing they had reversed them. The next alarming revelation came when investigators asked whether the team had tested the aileron system after reinstallation. The answer was a resounding no. They had not been required to conduct such a test. Instead, they had assumed the flight control team would correct any issues when they later replaced the cables. However, this assumption proved disastrous. The flight control team did arrive to install the new cables, but they simply followed the routing of the old ones without verifying their accuracy. Since the structural team had unknowingly reversed the cables, the new installation replicated the same fatal error. Investigators now needed to determine why the mistake had gone unnoticed, even after the new cables were in place. Typically, such an installation would be followed by a functional test to ensure everything was working correctly. However, a review of the fault history database revealed another crucial detail. The aircraft had still been undergoing maintenance on October 17th, the day the new cables were installed. As a result, the ailerons had not been tested immediately. The implications were chilling. Due to a series of missteps, confusing instructions, a lack of verification, and the absence of proper testing, an aircraft had been sent into the skies with its ailerons operating in reverse. What should have been a routine maintenance procedure had instead set the stage for disaster. From the analysis of the aircraft data, investigators found something shocking. This particular issue had never occurred before, at least not according to the fault history database. It raised an urgent question. When exactly had the maintenance been completed? The records showed that on October 26th, additional maintenance had been finalized and the aircraft had been powered up. However, another critical question emerged. Had they tested the other control systems at that time? The response was concerning. It appeared they hadn't been able to conduct those tests. Shortly after powering up the plane, a fault warning had appeared in the cockpit. Flight control, no dispatch. This error message served as a general alert, indicating that something required attention before the aircraft could take off. It could have been a minor issue, perhaps a faulty sensor or a loose connection, but its presence was enough to halt operations. The maintenance crew was left in uncertainty, unable to determine the precise cause of the fault. Regardless, they knew one thing for sure. The aircraft couldn't be cleared for flight with such an error message. Though the flight control no dispatch warning had nothing to do with the reversed aileron cables, it became a major distraction. The maintenance team's focus shifted entirely toward resolving the error message, diverting their attention from the aileron repairs. The pressure mounted as the aircraft remained grounded, and the technicians were desperate to find a solution. Investigators later asked the team how they had handled the situation when faced with the error. Their response was straightforward. They had dispatched a team to investigate. The technicians followed protocol, consulting manuals, and seeking assistance from the manufacturer. Yet, despite their best efforts, the issue persisted. Their next course of action was to replace the flight control computers, suspecting the problem might stem from those systems. These were brand new computers, meaning their memories were completely clean. When the aircraft was powered up again, the error message vanished. It seemed like a victory. The problem was resolved, and the plane was finally cleared to fly. To ensure everything was functioning properly, they performed operational checks. When asked whether they had tested all flight controls, the answer was an affirmative yes. They confirmed that the control surfaces were moving, and a visual check was also conducted. The ailerons, they noted, moved up and down without any apparent issue. However, a critical oversight occurred. No one thought to check if the ailerons were moving in the correct direction. This mistake would soon prove catastrophic. Investigators later pieced together the events leading up to the near disaster of Astana Flight 1388. The stage had been set a month prior when maintenance workers had mistakenly installed the aileron cables in reverse due to unclear instructions. On the day they intended to test the system, their focus had been abruptly diverted by the unexpected flight control no dispatch error. Once they resolved the issue by replacing the flight computers, they conducted routine operational checks but failed to verify one crucial detail: the direction of the aileron movement. As the aircraft took off, the pilots quickly realized something was wrong. "What's happening?" one of them asked. "There's something wrong with the yoke. I've never felt anything like this before." What followed was a terrifying 116-minute flight, with the crew battling an aircraft that did the exact opposite of what they commanded. Every attempt to correct their trajectory was met with an unexpected roll in the wrong direction. "Watch for the right roll as we descend past 1,000 feet, one of the pilots called out, struggling to maintain control. It was a battle against physics, confusion, and time. Miraculously, through sheer focus and teamwork, the crew managed to stabilize the aircraft just enough to attempt a landing. In their desperate situation, an experienced fighter pilot was brought in to help guide them down. "I'll guide you in. Do you have a visual on me?" he asked over the radio. His expertise proved invaluable, and with his assistance, the pilots executed a harrowing yet successful landing. For a long time, it seemed as though the worst outcome was inevitable. But against all odds, the crew had pulled through. Knowing they landed safely was just a tremendous relief, one investigator later recalled. What stood out the most was how this crew, none of whom were trained test pilots, had confronted a completely non-standard, life-threatening situation and remained calm enough to work through it logically. Their ability to adapt and problem-solve under immense pressure was nothing short of extraordinary. As a direct result of this incident, sweeping safety changes were implemented. The aircraft manufacturer Embraer made significant revisions to their manuals, ensuring that maintenance instructions were far clearer to prevent such errors in the future. This accident had exposed a critical flaw in the system, one that could have ended in disaster. But thanks to the resilience of the crew and the lessons learned from the investigation, the industry took steps to ensure that such a mistake would never happen again. In response to the alarming incident, Air Astana implemented more rigorous procedures for inspecting aircraft after maintenance, particularly when replacing aileron control cables. Recognizing the critical nature of flight control integrity, the airline introduced additional safeguards to ensure that every step of the process was thoroughly verified. New protocols were established to confirm the correct movement of the ailerons, making it mandatory to conduct comprehensive flight control checks. These measures aim to prevent similar oversights from happening again, reinforcing the necessity of precision in maintenance operations. Historically, maintenance errors have led to significant aviation incidents. This particular case served as a stark reminder of the vital role every stakeholder plays in ensuring flight safety. It underscored the fact that pilots, engineers, and maintenance crews must work seamlessly together, adhering to stringent protocols to uphold the highest safety standards in the aviation industry. Against all odds, the pilots of Air Astana Flight 1388 pulled off the impossible. Through sheer determination, quick thinking, and incredible skill, they regained control of their aircraft and brought it down safely, saving everyone on board. But this harrowing incident was not just a testament to human resilience. It was a chilling reminder of how a single maintenance error can turn a routine flight into a life-or-death struggle. As always, we appreciate you watching and supporting the channel. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into aviation's most shocking moments. And of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this incredible escape? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.